Hello, my name is Henrik. Glad you can join us live for day 3. I'm teaching again from January 9 to January 20, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So hope you can join me for these 10 days. I'll be teaching about programming. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about three myths about programming jobs. And I see these myths online whenever I go online. And when I look at Reddit and I see these people commenting about programming jobs. So I want to dispel some myths, 3 of them, and I hope it brings some clarity on what it actually is like to have a programming job. And by the way, if you've ever wanted to start learning how to program, I've got a free guide called my Personalized Finance App Programming Guide. It's a 12-step guide that teaches you how to go from no coding experience to building your first app. And basically, you'll learn some how to take your credit card transactions and categorize them in different budget categories so you know how much you're spending. So I think this is a really fun app and it's something that you can actually use. Oh, and also if you don't have a credit card, I do have a file there that you can play with. It has some fake transactions and you can play with that if you don't have your own credit card. And I think this would be a good first app for you if you're just getting started in your programming journey. So this guide is in the link in the description. You can download it there. It's absolutely free. So I hope I hope it's a good first project for you. Also, before we begin, I plan to open up the live for questions, and I'm just going to teach for a few minutes, and then after that I'll open it up and see what feedback people have. Sound good? Okay, so 3 myths about programming jobs, right? Okay, so the first myth is you have to know how to build an application from scratch. Whenever I look at forums online on Reddit, people are always saying, it seems like people are stressed out about knowing how to code an application from like the beginning stages to the end stages. I don't know if that's just me, but it seems like I think that's one of my thoughts too when I was learning how to program. I thought I had to know how to code a whole application from start to finish, and then you have to know how to make your own build scripts and put everything together. But actually, in reality, if you're just starting how to program, you're probably going to start off as a junior developer or some entry-level programmer, right? So you probably won't really touch any new code. You'll probably be building on someone else's code. Someone's probably hiring you to be a support for a more senior level programmer. So I think the more senior level programmers are the ones who are actually creating those initial code and making it so that the code runs and already has some features there but needs you to fix bugs, for example. So if you're just starting off, if you're an entry-level programmer, you will not need to know how to build an application from scratch. You'll probably most likely be given a code base, and then you have to build upon that code. And that's probably the thing that they'll ask you first. So when I started in my job, my jobs, they gave me a lot of code bases. So that's more common. They'll give you a code base, and basically you should just learn how the code works that is already existing, and then you just make incremental changes, small changes, and it's usually not really anything that's too detrimental or could cause potential damage to the product or the program. So it's more like low risk. So if you're just starting out, you don't have to worry about all the complex things when it comes to programming. And I will say this too is I've never built a program from scratch, except if it was for a prototype program. So in my first job, I was in research. So I had a lot of projects where I built programs from scratch, but they were just more proof of concept type programs. And I think it's only when you join a startup or you do research that you would actually build from scratch. But even if you were to build from scratch, it's not something that's very high risk. So, I mean, you can just build something really small. It's going to be really small in the beginning. So, knowing how to code a program from beginning to end, like the whole thing, you don't have to worry too much about that. Okay, so that's the first myth. The second myth is your programming job is centered on your language. So when I look online, people are always saying, uh, how do I get my first Python job or my first Java job or something like that? Actually, your job, if you get a programming job, your job is not really centered on one particular language, or it's not even centered on language. It's actually, your job is actually centered on the business idea, the product, the product that you're creating. And when you start working on the coding, you're basically finding what is the best programming language for this implementation. And so that was my experience for when I was in research. We had these ideas in research, and usually I was working with a PhD, someone who's had a PhD, and they would tell me, Henrik, I need to code this, and I want to code it. I think the best language is C, or the best language is Python. Then we'll code it. So we're not really thinking what we can build with Python or what we can build with C or any of these languages. We're thinking, what is the best programming language to go with? So we're not really, the job is not really centered on a particular language, but it is centered on the idea. But I will say this, if you have a product, if your company has a product and they're just building on this product and releasing new products that uses the same code, then you'll probably be using the same programming language over and over again in that company. So technically you are kind of like a C programmer or a Java programmer or Python programmer. But I think that mindset of like, I want to be this kind of programmer with this programming language, I don't think that should be the focus. The focus should be, I'm a developer and I can code in this language, I can code in this language, I've had experience in this language. But if I have to code in this language and it's better and makes more sense for the business, it makes sense for our company, then I will learn it and I will be able to do it. So that's the emphasis there is not on the language itself, but on the implementation and how we can get there. Because programming is a tool, right? Programming is just a tool to build something. And the thing that you're building is the focus. All right, so the third one is you have to memorize all the syntax and function names or code from memory. So I think this mindset, this is something that I thought I had to do when I was in university, because our quizzes, our test exams, we always had to code. We had to write everything from memory. I had to remember exactly, because I took C in university, so I had to code what is like printf, what is the exact syntax. I can't, if I say print instead of printf, then I get minus points. So that mindset was when I was thinking that when I start programming in the future, I'm gonna have to remember all these things. But in reality, you're actually not gonna remember the specifics of everything about your language, and sometimes you even forget, like even me sometimes, because I'm very lazy, sometimes I even have to look up how to do an if statement in a certain language. Like I kind of forget, because you start working with so many languages, you just know the general idea, like what is an if statement? Okay, an if statement is this and this and this, but what is the exact syntax that I use for this programming language? Because it varies a lot, but the general idea is there. So when it comes to coding, you're not thinking, you don't have to memorize like all the different ways you can write an if statement in this language, in this language, in this language. a lot of times I would just go in Google and type what is an if statement in C or if statement in Python, and then just copy and paste the general outline, and then I format it to the way I want. And it's not just if statements, but even functions. So general functions or ideas or libraries. Like I think when you start coding a lot, you're gonna start using a lot more libraries rather than code everything from scratch. Oh yeah, that's the other thing is, like in school we would learn about sorting algorithms, and also for me as an engineer, we would learn about how to write like algorithms for signal processing. But there's always a library already. There's already going to be libraries that you just use, and you just need to look up the tool, or look up the library and read the documentation. How do you use this function? If you want to do if you want to perform this type of algorithm on this data, you just look up the function and then see what kind of arguments you need to put in there. So when you're coding, you don't have to really you just have to know the general idea of what's possible for your language. And then when you have the general idea, you can just look up what kind of functions or what kind of libraries you might use. So I think one example that I actually did was I had a server client application, and we had to use we had to use ports. And I had to look up how to open a port and then close the port, send data through the port. I to this day I still actually don't even remember like what the actual function is, what the actual name, the exact names. Partly because there are different ways in other languages, and there are different libraries that you can use. But in that particular application that I built, I don't even remember. I don't even remember what it looks like. If you were gonna tell me to write it down, I couldn't do it. I would have to look it up online and see what libraries did I use. So you don't have to actually do code a lot in from memory. You just have to know the general idea. Maybe back in the day, like in the 80s or 90s, before the internet, maybe you had to memorize, or you had to at least have books by your side. But with the internet, you just look it up, just type it in, and then you see what libraries you can use, what tools you can use, and the exact syntax for a certain language that you're using. All right, so those are the three myths that I thought of. Those are three myths that I thought of. It's first one is, do you have to know how to build an application from scratch, from start to finish, completed, with zero bugs? No, not really. Even as an entry-level programmer, you probably will build on someone else's code. And the second one is, your programming job is centered on your language. It's not centered on your language. It's centered on the implementation. And then third one is, you have to memorize all the syntax and you have to be able to code from memory. But a lot of times, reality is you're gonna look at someone else's code and then adapt it to fit what you're trying to do. All right. So does that make sense? So I'd love to open it up for questions. If you have any questions, which of these three myths did you hold? Which of them were you thinking? Which one of these were you thinking, oh, so the programming jobs are like that? So which one of them are like that? Which one of those gave you that aha moment? Made you think, oh, okay, so I guess, okay, that makes sense. Programming jobs are more like this and rather than this. Or maybe maybe you have some questions about programming jobs in general. Feel free to ask a question in the chat or even in the comment section, and go ahead and ask, and you can I'll try to answer any questions you have about programming jobs. And also, if you haven't downloaded it already, I do have that programming guide. It's a 12-step guide that will take you from zero coding experience to building your first app. And I think it'd be a good start for you, because I think learning how to program, you need to have a good goal in mind. You have to have a task. When I was learning in university, I learned most from the projects, and that's when I started to take ownership of the language. And the same with um, in my workplace, in my job, I also learned the code I was working with by doing a task that they gave me. Because without the task, I'm just staring at the code, don't know what to do, what's important, I don't know what to search for. But when you have a goal in mind, then you can actually know what is it out there that you need to learn to accomplish what you're trying to do. So yeah, download the guide. It's in the link in the description. And I think it'll be a good start for you if you're starting to learn how to program and you need a project to work on. This would be perfect for you. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out. If you're catching this on the replay, leave your questions below in a comment. I'll be engaging with the comments in the coming days and weeks, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts so I can provide better help for you in your programming journey and better content for you and be able to teach you stuff that actually matters. All right. Well, thanks. Peace.